Where are we holding?
Yeah, it's Wolf.
Wolf Blitzer.
Wolf Blitzer.
All right.
What kind of calls are those?
Right now.
Okay, you have been muted?
I have everything muted.
And then we're going to turn on our mics and go on.
$13, $12, $11. Hello and welcome to this 2022 midterm election coverage here on WSOU, here on your YouTube channel. We will have a whole rotating cast of newscasters come in and out of this live stream every 20 minutes or so. We're going to take some breaks here and there as well. We'll also have our FM radio show recapping everything else that's going on 89.5 FM WSOU. So every half hour, make sure to tune in to 89.5 on either iHeartRadio or your radio dial. But we're about to get a whole lot of calls here as 8 o'clock is hit. A lot of polls have closed, and we're going to break it all down as it comes to you live here on WSOU's YouTube channel. I'm John McCooch, joined alongside the one and the only Andrew Rakulia. And Andrew, first off, how are we feeling about this election? It's going to be quite the electric night.
Yeah, this is going to be very interesting. Like this election, just like all other midterm elections, it's really a referendum on the current president and their party. It's a referendum on President Biden and the Democrats as they hold a unified government in Congress. They hold the presidency, they hold the House, they hold the Senate, but it's a very marginally unified government. Going into this election, Republicans only need 1 net gain in the Senate and 5 net gains in the House, and Republicans are really riding on a lot of optimism that they are going to have a really good night tonight. It's a very unfavorable Democratic environment with the issues of high inflation and economic uncertainty, but Democrats do hope that they are going to get high turnout over the issues of abortion and the influence of Donald Trump and Trump populism as they head to the polls.
Well, the midterms can kind of be sometimes a bit of a preview for what 2024 may look like with a lot of other issues on that ballot coming up, but that's 2 years away. We've got a lot to talk about today. Right now, you look at Politico. The Senate remains a toss-up over there. The House will likely flip to Republican. The governors, they believe that most Americans will be led by Democratic governors, so there's going to be quite the conflict of interest with a lot of people, and this is usually the case. You know, the last time a Democratic president had both a unified House and Senate in their second term was Jimmy Carter in 1979. So if Biden is able to find a way to flip this, it would be a very historic night. But I know you've got a lot of races that you're looking at very closely. What are some of those races?
So Senate-wise, the races to watch are Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Nevada. I'd say in that order. Those 3 races are really going to determine Senate control. In the governor's races, you got New York, Pennsylvania, of concern locally. You also got Georgia, Florida, Wisconsin, Kansas, Arizona, and Nevada on that side. And the House, we have a bunch of local competitive races in New Jersey 7th, New Jersey 3, New York 19, PA 8, PA 7, PA 17, Rhode Island 2. There are a lot of races that determine how the margins that are really going to signal how well the Democrats are going to perform nationwide.
You take a look at Georgia. Warnock currently leads Walker with a 54.6 percentage. There's about 31% of those votes in. 699,000 votes towards Warnock, 561,000 towards Walker. Everyone knows Walker as a former football player, now trying to take some political office. We have a lot of I guess celebrities, if you want to call them, trying to take some political office, but a lot of them have had successful campaigns. Matt Minaz is having a successful run currently in Pennsylvania. We're going to get into that in a bit as well. We're going to also focus more, on New York, Pennsylvania. That's where our listeners are kind of tuning in here on WSOU. That's going to be more on FM as well. But let's start with Georgia. right? You have Warnock, who came in. He's the incumbent currently, and you have Walker being a challenger who is a lot of hot takes on issues that a lot of people do agree with and a lot of people don't agree with. He's a candidate that would definitely shake up the state of Georgia if elected into that Senate seat. But, I mean, what are your thoughts on that election? Where do you kind of see that going right now?
So Georgia is unique because they have a rule that if a candidate doesn't get 50% of the vote in the general election, it has to go to a runoff. As we remember in 2020, that went to the famous January 5th runoff right before the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, which decided Senate control for the Democrats with that 50-50 split. But this year, if that happens, the runoff will be on December 6th. And I feel like that's going to come down to the wire. It's very possibly going to go to a runoff. And the thing about the candidates is that Raphael Warnock is running for a full term. The special election he won in 2020 was to fill the last 2 years of the Senate seat that in the class of the Senate. And so he ran concurrently with John Ossoff. And Ossoff narrowly won, much more narrowly than Warnock did in the January 2021 runoff election. And if Warnock loses, that could also signal that really the runoff in 2021 was more of a fluke. It was really like peak Democratic turnout, and it really would signal that Georgia is more of a Republican-leaning state than a pure toss-up like we thought 2 years ago.
Now some more votes coming in now. 32% in. That gap continues to get a little bit closer for Walker. He's still down, just above 10% right there, but it's definitely going to be a close race. You look at Alabama, it looks like that one is about to be called. Marco Rubio will most likely be in the next Senate seat. He'll retain that seat in Florida. You have South Carolina where Scott will take 58% of that vote. 5% is in, but that one's looking very much towards him. Then you got Indiana. Young has been called 62.8% with 20% of the vote in, so still definitely a lot of time, but a huge gap right there in Indiana. So, another race, Andrew, there's a lot going on right now. I know you mentioned a few. You had Arizona in there. I mean, what other races should we be looking at tonight?
I'd say Wisconsin is another race to consider. That's a race we're going to hear about earlier in the night as we go along. We got Mandela Barnes, the current sitting lieutenant governor, running to challenge Senator Ron Johnson, who promised that he wouldn't run for a third term, but he is anyway. And it is expected as of the 538 forecast that Johnson is going to cruise to re-election because Mandela Barnes is more of a progressive Democratic candidate. And in Wisconsin, those races are really, really close. Trump won it by less than 1% in 2016. Biden won it by less than 1% in 2020. Those races tend to be very, very narrow, but I feel like Ron Johnson does have the advantage in Wisconsin, and it was an opportunity that Democrats early on did think they really did have a chance because of the relative unpopularity of Johnson, but we'll see how it goes.
And I know before we went on the air, a little bit off air, you had some predictions that you had. What are those looking like in terms of what's going to flip and how this election's going to turn out?
So based on the overall enthusiasm, based on how well Republicans are going to do, I feel like the most likely scenario is that Republicans will indeed take the House. That's not much of a hot take. They have the event. They only needed to gain 5 seats. They gained a lot in redistricting alone. But the Senate, it really is a pure toss-up. It's going to come down to Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Nevada. I really think those 3 races. I don't think we're going to know the final outcomes of those 3 races tonight by the time this broadcast is over, but those 3 races are going to decide Senate control.
Right, we're going to cover as much as we can here on WSOU, but obviously, you have the West Coast. That gets reported at around 11 o'clock. This live stream will end at 12 a.m. That'll be the final time we go on, and that will end, and that'll be it. So we got 4 hours of coverage here on WSOU, but, you also want to talk about NJ3, that district, very key district, bit of a homer situation, but definitely an important one to talk about. New Jersey has a lot of House seats up today, and a lot going on there in the state of New Jersey. So you take a look at NJ3. In redistricting, they lost all their towns from Ocean County, gained several in Burlington, Mercer, and Monmouth counties. And prior to redistricting, they had a lot of towns in Ocean County, which are super red counties over there, while Burlington is a left-leaning county. So what are we supposed to be looking at here in NJ3?
So it was in the 2018 election year where it was a blue wave for Democrats. Democrats won plenty of seats, especially in New Jersey. They flipped a lot of seats in this state. And in 2018, current incumbent Representative Andy Kim unseated incumbent Tom MacArthur by only 1.3%. It was very, very narrow victory for him in a traditionally red district. And then in the same district before redistricting in 2020, he won by just less than 8%. He was more relatively popular. But now going into this year, even though redistricting helped out Kim with more Democrat-leaning municipalities,
Right.
the margin of how Kim could win or even possibly lose, that's really going to determine the extent of a supposed red wave that we could see across the country, at least in regards to the House elections.
I know in terms of a red wave, I know that term, it gets thrown down a lot. But this situation, I remember kind of last election, you have the governor election, Jack Ciattarelli, that was expected to be quite the landslide. But there are a lot of times, especially in, NJ3 area, that in Bergen County especially, obviously up north there, you had a lot of situations where Ciattarelli was really getting in close to a lot of counties that maybe you didn't expect, a lot of voting areas that maybe you didn't expect Ciattarelli to win a lot of votes in. Murphy still won that by a pretty decent margin, but it wasn't enough of a margin where voters in New Jersey, Democratic voters in New Jersey, were confident that they were able to truly retain and have a dominant lead in a very Democratic state, obviously, and they keep the Democratic governor. But you look at somewhere like this where it's a close race and anything can really happen, especially in a lot of other districts in New Jersey. But what other districts in New Jersey are we kind of looking at today?
Well, I think that the New Jersey race that most voters are keeping an eye on is New Jersey 7. It's a race between incumbent Tom Malinowski, a Democrat, and Tom Keene Jr. Keene Jr. ran against Malinowski last time, and he just narrowly lost. Malinowski won in 2018 with 51.7% of the votes, and he won by even less in 2020. And this year, the redistricting commission really kind of threw Malinowski under the bus. They kind of accepted that he's probably going to lose in 2022.
Right.
So let's just probably give Republicans a little extra edge there, and that's probably going to be Republicans' most likely House pickup in this state tonight.
So you're thinking that's most likely going to flip tonight?
Yeah.
That there's a really good chance. And that's, again, you're seeing New Jersey, those ideas and everything that Ciattarelli brought to the table, it's still, even if you don't win that governor spot, it still has such an influence in the next round of voting, in the midterms. And that's exactly what the Republicans needed, was a governor in a Democratic state like this, where it's able to find a way to flip. And that's exactly what you may be going on in the state of New Jersey. Again, there's a lot going on. NJ6, you have the incumbent Frank Pallone Jr., 1993, first elected. There's going to be like those elections. You don't expect those to flip. Although anything, again, is possible in New Jersey. But it looks like Ron DeSantis also will most likely win re-election in the state of Florida right now, and Marco Rubio also wins that. Well, what are we thinking now that is the most likely outcome in the state of Florida? Because, you mentioned Ron DeSantis. He may have a not just a governor running him, but he may have a presidential running him in 2024. So definitely a key moment in Florida where, he's been asked a lot about that presidential run. And he said, I'm just focused on the midterms, which obviously you have to be focused on midterms if you want to win them. But it's also great. It's interesting to see how quickly that flipped, how quickly that was called, because it seems that Florida is definitely trending in a more red direction.
Yeah, you can't talk about the current Republican Party without the elephant in the room.
Right.
Donald Trump.
Literally the elephant. Yes.
So Trump has this insane influence of the Republican Party. Ron DeSantis has been a vocal supporter of him, but DeSantis' challenger, who is projected to lose right now, Charlie Crist, he harked on the potential speculation for 2024 in their campaign debate. He asked him, "Are you going to run in 2020?" He informally asked him if he's going to run in 2024, and DeSantis couldn't answer. So
Right.
you feel like he really does have that bit in him, because DeSantis is a very popular governor. He's very respected among the Republican Party nationwide for not not dealing with any of the Democrats' policies, not losing the chance to rebuke them or try to dissuade them in any way. He really doesn't want that. And the problem with having a run against Donald Trump is that I feel like that could really start a civil war between the Republican Party heading into 2024 when they really have a lot of momentum as it is. that's going to be a problem for them 2 years from now.
Right, you see a Republican Party, there's a lot of Republicans trying to kind of move away from Trump, get away from that, and you have a very large group of that. So you can see they're already kind of having that civil war that you mentioned in the Republican Party because, you may see the Democrats do a lot better than expected. Obviously, the Republicans are expected to have a pretty good night tonight. They're expected to flip, the House and all of that, but they may not flip it by the margin that you want to see. It's going to be close tonight. We're not going to know a lot as well. That's why everything is going to be so close, because you just have so much eating each other alive within the Republican Party. Really, there's no other way to put it. But right now it still looks good for the Republicans, but the Democrats, they are putting up quite a fight, and they don't really have to do as much as they maybe have to because of how those different ideas, you have the Trump ideas, which can be considered a little bit more far right, and then you have Republicans kind of trying to get back to the quote-unquote good old days of the Republican Party. So there's a lot going on there. Do you expect that to be a problem in the midterm elections as well, or is that more something you're looking for the presidential elections?
I really don't know how it's going to go. Well, the reason why 2021 last year was so successful for Republicans is that they tried to put Trump in the rearview mirror. They really spoke to the centrist idea. That's why, even though Chitterelli didn't win in 2021, he came so close because he distanced himself from Trump. He spoke with that centrist Republican message. He didn't propose anything radical. He said he would respect the right to abortion. He said he would accept the results of the election, and he even promised to run again in 2025 when Governor Murphy's second term is up. So we'll see how that goes. It's really about that margin of centrism versus partisanship in the Republican Party.
And a huge state for the Republican Party, the big one, Texas, right? You have Beto O'Rourke going against Greg Abbott, who has faced a lot of flack over his past few years as being a governor. You have the storm situation. You have everything going on with pro-choice, pro-life decision-making. And the state of Texas has seen a lot of new people come in from California as well, other states. So that race may be pretty close over there in Texas with Beto O'Rourke, who's made an attempt before at other places, but Greg Abbott, the expectation is Republican right now. But that race is something that could be closer. And for 2022 and beyond, this is a moment in the history of the state of Texas where, especially if this flips somehow, where you can see a more blue Texas coming up within the next few election cycles. I don't know if you agree with that statement, but it's definitely something that can happen.
Well, I agree that Texas is flipping more blue. Trump won it by roughly 5 points in 2020, and Beto O'Rourke came very, very close to unseating Ted Cruz in 2018. That was a wave year for Democrats. They flipped a lot of House seats in Texas in 2018. But I feel like Beto O'Rourke picked the wrong year to campaign against the sitting Republican governor in an expected Republican wave year. Republicans are really going to turn out to vote in Texas. I feel like this isn't going to be the best night for Democrats in Texas. But overall, in the long term, I feel like Texas is going to be much more of a battleground state than, say, Florida.
Because that's a state for Republicans that was just an easy one. That was just an automatic, right? But now you just have that debate. And the fact that there's that debate within that state, that's a lot of electoral votes. And a Democrat potential president is going to flip that state, that's going to be huge.
And it gained votes. Right. It gained, what was it, 3 votes, 2 votes in redistricting?
Something around there, yeah. So it's just such a wild moment to look at because, again, the state of Texas is such a divisive state now. It's just a safe spot for Republicans before. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of flipping in this country. And now you have Pennsylvania potentially coming in with John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz, also known as Dr. Oz, potentially looking to take that Senate seat. Right now, 5% of the vote is in, so not much there just now. Fetterman has a big lead, but, a lot of Democratic counties being reported. Do you see Oz kind of having a chance there? Because that's a very close race with Fetterman and Oz right there.
It's going to be close. I know it's going to be close. However, if you look back at the primary, Fetterman won every single county in Pennsylvania, easily. He won over 60% of the Democratic primary vote back in May. Oz, on the other hand, it came down to 419 votes with David McCormick in the Republican primary. So you have that bitter division. It's unknown if Oz has been able to reconcile that intra-party division and get all those McCormick supporters back on his side to support his candidacy and try to keep their Republican seat in Pennsylvania. But But Fetterman has had a lot more popular grassroots support. He's a sitting lieutenant governor. He and Tom Wolf won pretty convincingly in 2018, and I feel like Fetterman does have a narrow advantage in such a big battleground state, but we'll see.
That's one that may take a little bit of time to finally be called, but we may have a good idea as this election goes on. It continues to go on. But that will do it for us for now here on WSOU's YouTube channel. We'll be back in about 20 minutes here on WSOU, so make sure to just stay calm, maybe grab a drink or a snack or something, because we're going to be here for a while. Next we'll be on WSOU FM, 89.5 FM, where I will also be there with Ryan Henry, as we did last year, to discuss what's going on locally, Pennsylvania, New York, and districts in New Jersey. But that would do it for us from now. Again, make sure to stick around. I'm John McCooch. I'll be joined again by Andrew Rakulia later at around 8:40, so make sure to stay tuned and keep it locked to WSOU News. Yeah, are we okay? Are we all in the frame?
I can't check because the Be Right Back screen is still on.
So we'll find
So
out.
if I turn off
Just
the Be
start-
Right Back
just
All
do
screen,
it.
right, that's fine.
Yeah. So we'll just go here, and we're gonna go to David at about 8:45.
Awesome.
Okay.
I would like to talk about like the speculation about Georgia, and Arizona, Nevada, and Wisconsin.
Okay. Cool.
this one on
That was your. This is one.
Yeah.
So we want one on.
there.
Okay, I'll move that a little closer to Andrew.
I'll keep mic 2 muted for the rest of the thing, like on stream.
Okay.
Let me know when you want to go back.
Yeah. So yeah, David, you're gonna go 8:45. So you want to talk about? I'm sorry.
Georgia, Arizona, Nevada.
So you want to talk about those?
Wisconsin.
Okay, we're gonna talk about. We'll talk about
That one
Georgia.
is muted, right?
this one. Is
Yep.
Like the button.
This
It's
flashing.
blinking.
Yep, it's blinking, which means it's muted.
I'm scared. I'm scared to hit the unmute on Streamlabs in case something fucking
Yeah.
turns on.
Oh,
New York Times, House of the Dragon. No, that's
Yeah. Kemp took the lead as well. Governor wise.
yeah. I can talk about
Yeah,
that.
Kemp took the lead, and yeah,
That's like a similar situation
I
with
don't
Beto
have that on
O'Rourke. And
NBC. What number
I have
is
it
that?
on. I have it on. Well, I think maybe I'm a little behind. I don't
Are we
know.
going on
Let me
8:42?
reload.
Give me a minute. Okay, we'll go on in 30 seconds.
Oh, Kemp. Okay, I'm sorry.
Kemp,
I'm looking
yeah,
at
Georgia.
the Senate race.
Yeah.
not hemp.
Governor.
Kemp is leading
Kemp is leading
Walker
by.
by about 4, which is an interesting spread.
Oh, you mean like
Did you
Republican?
get a-
Republican?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you
yeah.
can kind of see, you're going to see that in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
You're probably going to see a plus 10
Okay.
odds over Mastriano.
Yeah. How much we got? 10 seconds.
I don't know.
Okay.
You said 30 seconds. so
10 seconds.
give me a count.
Coming down.
Wait, hold on. The mic should be between you two.
But we have two going on.
We're just
It'll
gonna
be
keep-
fine. It'll
We're
be
gonna
fine.
keep
It's
them
for
there
show.
and make it look like
It's for sure.
they're both talking.
But it's gonna be a
on
little
mic,
closer
but
to
it's
me.
just the one mic.
Yep.
All right, 9, 7, 6.
Hello and welcome back to WSOU News' coverage of the 2022 midterm elections here on your home for the loudest rock, 89.5 FM WSOU. But we're here on the YouTube channel, which is something we don't do super often, but we're here, we're around, and I'm back with Andrew Merculia. This is the last time you'll see the dynamic duo right here. But we've had a lot go on. We've had a lot of leads being taken. I know we want to specifically talk about that state of Georgia right there that we're seeing. You're seeing Stacey Abrams. She lost her lead at that governor spot. Warnock, his lead is slowly fading in that state as well. Now 45% of those Senate votes coming in. Warnock leading 51% to 47 with Walker being down. But he was down over 10% with, again, like under 10, 15, 20% of the vote coming in. But you see more and more come in, and it's really going to get down to the wire in the state of Georgia. And really, I mean, we talked about it a lot before, but with Herschel Walker, with a lot of the ways that he goes about his business, it's something that we haven't really seen before, especially in the state of Georgia as well. And Warnock, I mean, he was able to closely win in the previous election, but now Herschel Walker, yes, the Herschel Walker, the running back, former of the Minnesota Vikings, Dallas Cowboys, could be the Senate of the state of Georgia. So, Andrew, I mean, what are your thoughts on that so far, and what are you seeing in that state?
So I feel like looking back on the 2021 January runoff election in Georgia, Trump had a negative influence on the Republican base there. Like he had so much rhetoric saying, "Oh, your vote's not going to count," and all that, and it kind of just marginally just dissuaded enough Republicans to put Warnock and John Ossoff in the Senate from that runoff election. And I feel like this could be the opposite this year. Republicans are very, very energized. Like if you look back to the governor's race, you have Stacey Abrams losing by 3.5% right now.
She had the lead too. Kemp took that lead over there in the state of Georgia.
Exactly. It was very, very close when she first ran in 2018, and she attributed her loss to a lack of turnout. There was voter suppression. There were faulty voting machines that broke down. There were too little polling places, and she made her focus on high turnout from the black population all across the state of Georgia. But I feel like Beto O'Rourke in Texas, she kind of picked the wrong year to actually successfully earn her seat as the governor of Georgia. I feel like she could run again. She could win 4 years from now. It's possible, but I don't think it's going to happen right now. because the Republican base is so energized to reelect Brian Kemp and to possibly bring Herschel Walker to the Senate and vote against Raphael Warnock. Because, yes, Herschel Walker is a very problematic candidate. He's done some pretty bad things. He said some pretty bad things. He's actively dissuaded saying that he's done anything wrong. But candidate quality is not so important now as partisanship. The Republicans see that he's a Republican. They don't care if he paid for an abortion despite being a staunch anti-abortion politician. They want to retake that Senate majority. They know they have to retake that Senate majority, and they're going to do whatever they can to make sure that happens.
And taking a look at it, it looks like it's very, very real possibility. Stacey Abrams also a very popular politician in general, one that could really flip the state of Georgia and put it in a more Democratic and left-leaning direction. And we saw that as well, as you see the turnout, not there. And that's been a problem just in general with elections. You see turnout kind of being a reason why Democrats may lose and everything of that nature. But we're going to get a quick update on everything that is going around the United States from our reporter over here in our studio, just about 5 feet to our left. But it's David Holtzman. David, what do you have so far in this United States of America?
Good evening, John. We got some races that were called. The Senate currently stands with called races: 36 Republicans, 37 Democrats. Rand Paul, Tim Scott, Peter Welch, Todd Young, Katie Britt in Alabama, Marco Rubio in Florida, the one close to the toss-up race. These races have all been called. Both Republicans have won their races in Oklahoma. And Richard Blumenthal, Connecticut, Tammy Duckworth, Illinois, Chris Van Hollen in Maryland. Had a number of governors have already races been called. Florida's been called for Ron DeSantis, and Ohio's been called for Mike DeWine. Sarah Huckabee Sanders will become the first female governor of Arkansas. And the overall results tonight don't really resemble anything strong one way or the other. It's not really clear that this is going to be a red wave. It's not really clear that the Republicans are even going to take the Senate. It's a very middle-of-the-road scenario where the results are as they relate to the polls. And we're going to learn more as the night goes on. Back over to you, John.
Well, David, thank you so much. Very informative update over there. One thing I noticed kind of looking as well is the Republicans have gained a +4 net gain currently in the total House of the United States. That's something that we, all expect to flip, no matter who you ask. That's something that's expected to flip. And already you see that +4 net gain over there in the House. The Democrats will need to flip some seats if they want to find a way to retain that. But, Andrew, I know you have a lot of other races that you want to look at. You have the big four over there. Arizona next up on that list, Andrew, and we saw a lot from Arizona in the presidential election. That one took quite some time for us to find out, and that really dominated the internet how long that took at the time. But now we see a very, very hot race over there.
So in Arizona, we have former astronaut Mark Kelly, the incumbent Democratic senator, who won against his Republican opponent, who was a fill-in, a stand-in Republican senator to fill in the remaining term of John McCain. Now it's a full term for that one Senate seat. He's running against Blake Masters, a Republican who was endorsed by Donald Trump. And Arizona has had so much more left-leaning momentum in recent years. In 2018, Kristen Sinema won there. In 2020, Kelly won. But now this is really going to be a test of if that leftward movement can sustain. Is that Latino population growing even further? Is Maricopa County going to deliver for Democrats again with its expansion and its overall Democratic lean? It's really interesting to see how Republicans are really going to try to gain some momentum again in this state, as the previous two Senate elections were both decided by 2.4 percentage points. And compared on the presidential level, the 2020 election was decided by less than 1 point, just like in Wisconsin and Georgia there. So it's marginal. It's going to be very, very close. And you're going to see the same thing on the governor level. We have Katie Hobbs, the incumbent Secretary of State in Arizona, running for governor against Carrie Lake, a Republican who served as as a big staunch member of the Republican Party. She's a former news anchor. And the really key issue, I feel like what's going to cost Katie Hobbs the election, is that she refused to debate Carrie Lake. Lake is a former news anchor. She's very used to the TV spotlight. She knows how to get her message across, but she is very, very right-wing. She has spoken about a lot of conspiracies. She's made her views very well known about everything. And Katie Hobbs has been much more timid about everything. She hasn't been willing to debate her because she doesn't think she's going to get the chance to speak, and she doesn't want it to be an opportunity for Lake to express herself,
Right.
which I feel like could be a bit of a problem, because if you're concerned about your opponent being so flamboyant about their controversial views, don't you want that? I feel like that's really going to cost Hobbs in this election. Even if Mark Kelly wins, I feel like Katie Hobbs losing the governor race in Arizona is really going to be because of her refusal to debate her.
You know, it's always interesting to look at that kind of situation. You saw that even with presidential times, where people don't want to debate a lot of the time because you don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want something to be clipped. I think you see that in the age of the internet as well. All it takes is one clip to ruin your election. So in a moment like that, where you could see maybe a quote-unquote an own over there, where that would just ruin the entire race. So that's the decision. It may not be the right decision, and we'll find out how much that may cost her in the election and see if that is a factor over the state of Arizona. Again, a very key state for the Democrats and the Republicans to win. You want to be able to flip that battleground state, that swing state that always comes up in the presidential elections. Those results come in about 10 minutes over at 9 o'clock, so we'll see the direction. We'll see how right you are, Andrew. I know you also have Wisconsin on that list. We brought it up before. Another state that was very close in the presidential election. And if you see that kind of go one way or the other, you'll get a really interesting preview of 2024 in just 2 years, where another president will be decided. We don't know who the Republican candidate is going to be. We're assuming Joe Biden will be the Democratic nominee for the president of the United States, on the Democratic side. But either way, Wisconsin is such an important race.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier on the presidential level, Trump won it by less than one. Biden won it by less than one. And the Senate election, it is leaning in Ron Johnson's direction. But the governor race, that is going to be very, very important. You got Tony Evers, the Democrat incumbent, elected in 2018, defeating incumbent Scott Walker only by 1.1% in a Democratic wave year, mind you. And he's running against Tim Michaels on the Republican. He was a former Army member. He described himself as a businessman, not a politician. And he's made his focus jobs in the economy. And in a very centrist, middle of the ground, very, very competitive state, that's going to be very key to just how far Republicans are once again have the momentum nationwide.
There's a lot of momentum over there on the Republican side, and again, we're just a few minutes away, really, from getting a look at how everything will go on more out west in the United States, so that's going to be something to watch, Andrew. Is there another race that you're really looking at crucially here as things go on and things continue to go on here in the United States? I mean, there's a lot going on. There's a lot more battlegrounds than you really see a lot of the time. This is such a very divisive midterm election so far.
Yeah, so it's not so much a singular race,
Right.
It's a state, and that is Nevada. Nevada, I feel like, could really, really shake up how Democrats see this election. There's a very, very critical Senate race there, with Catherine Cortez Masto, a Democratic incumbent, really, really endangered of losing. She's been trailing in the polls for the past month or two to Adam Laxalt, her challenger. It is a 2-point race at best. Nevada has tended to underestimate Democrats in the polls historically. We saw that in 2020. We saw that in 2018. We saw that in 2016. But really, who knows? This is the first Republican wave year since then, expected at least. And who knows? Because that could really be, if not Georgia, Nevada could be a Republican pickup in the Senate. That could be what they need. Should John Fetterman not win in Pennsylvania, and should Herschel Walker win in Georgia, that could be a really, really big, crucial pickup for Republicans in the Senate.
And you also have some outspoken Republicans holding on to their House seat. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene holding House 14 in the state of Georgia. You also have something that was called pretty recently. Matt Gaetz holds House 1 in Florida, as we see a huge, really Republican wave over there in the state of Florida. So there's a lot going on. Is there anything else you really have to add before we send it to a break here, Andrew?
There is also the governor election in Nevada, which could be even less competitive and more so leaning in Republicans' favor there. Incumbent Steve Sisolak, the Democrat, is challenged by Joe Lombardo, who, like Cortez Masto, was elected in 2018. He served as Clark County Commissioner. He served in the U.S. Army. Lombardo served in the U.S. Army, and they have been tied in several polls going back to back. Lombardo has had a little bit more consistent support, and while this isn't so important at the federal level legislation-wise, this could be key to what Republicans see as a major victory nationwide.
We're now 5 minutes away from the 9 o'clock polls closing. That will tell us a lot about how the rest of this country is going to look for the rest of 2020 to 2024. But that will do it from us here in the studio over here on WSOU's YouTube channel. We'll be going back on FM, on 89.5 FM, where we will have even more coverage and even more recaps focusing on the local elections here in New Jersey, here over there in Pennsylvania, and over there in New York. But I'm John Bakuch for Andrew Bakulia. We will see you in just a bit.
Welcome back into WSOU News' studio coverage of Election Night 2022. I'm Ryan Johnston alongside
Amanda De Jesus.
Amanda De Jesus. And Amanda, a couple more results coming in now. We've seen Chuck Schumer and AOC both win in New York. What do you see that as maybe a more of a blue wave in New York to remain?
I definitely believe that New York will stay blue, especially in the New York City area. Chuck Schumer has got it in the bag. So to say, because he's been senator for such a long time, New York hasn't even had like a Republican be a governor since I think 20 years. So I think New York City is staying blue for sure, especially if AOC in her district, especially blue, Bronx and Queens. So there's definitely a blue wave in New York.
Well, we'll see if that can remain in the gubernatorial election. Kathy Hochul and Lee Zeldin. David, do you have an update for us on what's going on there?
Yeah, as it currently stands, Kathy Hochul is leading Lee Zeldin by about a 3-1 margin, 75-25. She's got a 260,000 ballot lead. But most of the ballots insofar are from New York City. Actually, all of the ballots insofar are from the New York City area. So it's still extremely early. I heard earlier today that that turnout in New York was lower than where Democrats need it to be. But Kathy Hochul, although she's running behind Chuck Schumer by maybe 5 or 10 points, she's still running ahead of Lee Zeldin by about 5 or 10 points. So while Republican enthusiasm so far tonight has been contained largely to Florida, it doesn't appear that there's any sort of red strength elsewhere in the country. We're looking at a very middle-of-the-road scenario as it relates to polls, and that holds true in New York as well as it holds in the rest of the country. If that holds, Kathy Hochul will keep her seat as governor of New York. And if you want to look at Pennsylvania, if you want to get an update what's going on there, John Fetterman is leading Dr. Oz by about he's up by about 200,000 ballots. That's a 50% lead. But again, most of the votes that are in so far in Pennsylvania are in from cities. One other news piece that's been going on today is Arizona, and there was a monumental ruling just a few minutes ago by a judge in Arizona. Maricopa County, in Maricopa County, 20% of the ballot tabulators were not working at polling stations on Election Day, which would impact Republican vote. Republicans largely vote Election Day. Democrats, to make generalizations, will vote early vote and by mail. And so in Maricopa County, Republicans filed a lawsuit to extend voting from when it was supposed to close at 9 o'clock 13 minutes ago over till 12, and that lawsuit has already been denied from a judge. So it's a good turnout sense. It's a good case scenario for the Democrats in Arizona, where Republicans put up two candidates that did not appear strong but have been gaining strength in the recent weeks.
Wow. That's certainly a big story. I'd say, I don't know about if denying votes is the right way to put it, but it's more of, the voting machine's not working, judge not allowing an extension in what is really a big swing state in the United States.
Definitely. I feel like it's not 100% accurate to say that voting in person, there are more Republicans. I think that was more of like a 2020 pandemic era type of thing. So I don't think that necessarily means that solely Republicans are voting in person while Democrats are absentee ballots, early voting, So I think that's something to consider when talking about whether or not this gives Republicans like a different advantage or disadvantage, depending how you look at it when it comes to the elections, the race. So,
talking about voter turnout more generally, we went out earlier today in the field to get some quotes from the people about what it means for them to vote. And we saw, I think, pretty decent turnout at the few polling stations that we went to. We went to one here on campus in Bethany Hall. We went to the South Orange Middle School right down the road, and also Newark East Side. That's my Delaware coming out. Newark East Side High School. in Newark, New Jersey. Any highlights from that you really thought caught your eye?
I think locationally, New Jersey tends to lean more Democratic, so most of the people we did speak with had that leaning, that bias. But it's interesting. There's like, we even spoke to someone who said they still label Republican. So I think not necessarily on a large level, but I think New Jersey might even in some districts lean a little more Republican this year due to redistricting and that sort of thing. So that's something to keep in mind when we're looking at these election results as they come in.
I think that's definitely something that we can see more down south as well, towards the beaches, that more of a Republican, not stronghold, but more Republican-leaning area down there.
But you'll be surprised, though, in the suburbs, and this is controversial, but Central Jersey.
Oh. Oh, whoa. Doesn't exist, Alvin?
No, Central Jersey does not.
And parts of North Jersey, you might see a bit more Republican-leaning, depending on the town, that sort of thing. So I think we'll see. It's going to be a very interesting race this year, especially since thinking back to last year of the governor race, people were surprised the margin between the Democratic candidate and the Republican was smaller than people thought, so there is a lot of red within New Jersey.
I think we're seeing that sort of nationwide tonight as well, not this, as a lot of people were expecting, this red wave coming through and sort of taking a lot of seats from the Democrats, especially in the House. But like David has been talking about earlier, we haven't really seen that as much. We've really seen strong Republican turnout in Florida, but the rest of the country, it's just been pretty 50-50 all around. Any thoughts moving forward on that?
I think it's for most places, it's too early to call. Like right now it could be 50-50, but maybe in 2 hours, a Republican is leading over a Democrat or vice versa. So like I said, it's too early to call, but as votes come in, we'll see where that goes.
Well, specifically in Florida, we've seen, I believe, Ron DeSantis, correct me if I'm wrong, David, Ron DeSantis and Marco Rubio securing their seats again. What do you think that means for Floridians moving forward?
Definitely Florida is, as of now, is a Republican stronghold. I feel that a lot of people, personally, I've noticed like a lot of people who are right-leaning or to the right moving to Florida, but that's like a personal account. But in terms of that, like I just think that it's going to be very hard unless you live in like a Democratic district to win in Florida as a Democrat.
Yeah, we've certainly seen that that sort of phenomenon, people moving to Florida. Specifically, I think a huge state that people have been moving from is California. And I don't know exactly what to say about it, but I think
that comes into play when thinking about Texas, because that's another big race this year as well.
I have news on that. Fox News has called Texas for Greg Abbott.
Oh,
Okay.
Interesting. Okay. Because, wow. Okay.
Yeah, early, right?
Very
Right.
early.
Fox with the early calls, first Arizona in 2020 and now with Texas. Abbott was projected to win over Beto O'Rourke. It's not that much of a surprise. Maybe it's just a surprise that they're calling it this early.
Yeah, definitely very early.
when did polls close in Texas? Just curious.
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
Polls
Okay.
closed only a few minutes ago. Most polls have closed already. Most polls have closed already. 10 o'clock we're going to get Colorado, Montana, Nevada. Nevada's a big toss-up state. Utah we're not going to know a while because pretty much everyone in Utah votes by mail. But Texas, 9 o'clock.
Very early call there, but that's big news for Texas moving forward. It's sort of staying in that more red area of the spectrum.
Definitely. I feel like the change in Texas, if you think about people moving there who are probably like more voting Democrat or left leaning, that's going to make a difference probably in the local elections, like cities, that sort of thing. But it's interesting to see that it hasn't made a difference overall in terms of the governor election.
Speaking specifically on Greg Abbott, he's been a huge proponent of border control, and he's been making a point about it specifically to New York residents in general by shipping buses of migrants to New York City, and we've seen those migrant islands sort of popping up around New York City because of that. That's been Eric Adams' response to that. Do you see that continuing, perhaps, with him being reelected?
Definitely. I feel like Greg Abbott is very set in his immigration policy, and I think he wants to make a statement. He has a lot of, like I said, national attention, and this is something I predict he may continue in the future.
I'd say it's definitely a possibility. Looks like, David, you're writing down some notes right now. Any news coming in?
Yeah, Jared Polis, NBC has called the governorship of Colorado for Jared Polis. Polis is a widely popular governor of Colorado. He's a Democrat. He tends to govern more libertarian. He's known for legalizing a number of drugs and taking an approach of we the state are not really going to interfere with your personal business. And that has interfered with Colorado, which was a bit of a purple state before he took over, but it's moved blue over the years as he's had an influence there, kind of similar to what DeSantis has had in Florida, both tremendously influential governors who have pulled their states to their parties.
With his reelection, we've not only his reelection, but this is sort of something that we've seen nationwide, especially pushing for the legalization of marijuana. Do you think that his reelection, I should say, could further spread that legalization of marijuana nationwide? Because it's clear that people like him and his policies.
It's interesting because I feel like Colorado already made its mark. It was the first state, I believe, to legalize marijuana. So I think, like I said, he's not going to make more of an impact nationally, I feel. But if you say maybe another state that's like, if you see more states doing the same that
Maybe
were
a swing state.
a swing state, like let's say Texas or something, like pushing for legalized marijuana, then you could say that's like an indicator of a shift or a change in parties. But I think right now it's safe to say that Colorado doesn't really have the biggest impact on the country's marijuana policy.
That's fair. Yeah, and especially with, Greg Abbott getting reelected in Texas, it'd be hard for me to see that being pushed through in a huge fashion in Texas anytime soon. But it's always worth considering, and how these gubernatorial elections affect the state as the country as a whole. And I think the two big elections not the only two, but two of the biggest elections for gubernatorial affairs in Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott both going red. Do you see that affecting the country as a whole nationwide?
Definitely. I think the midterms are always the foundation of how people predict the presidential election, because they see, okay, in the midterm, this state voted Republican, this state voted blue. What does that mean? Like, does it mean they're going to vote blue as a state for the presidential election? So I think this is a really good indicator of how we're heading in our presidential election come 2024.
Well, we're just about out of time here in the studio. Again, we're going to take another quick break. Be sure to tune in for FM coverage at 9:30, but that'll do it for myself, Ryan Johnson, alongside Amanda DeJesus, and David Holtzman will be back when we return. But thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back shortly.
All right, and welcome back to WSOU midterm election coverage. I'm Megan Kelly.
And I'm Brian Henderson.
And before we get into any of our updates on our own, we're going to send you over to David, who has been watching this election very closely. David, any updates for us right now?
Hi, Megan. Since Fox News called the Texas gubernatorial race for Greg Abbott, there's been one other major call, which is Michael Bennett in Colorado. And the Democratic incumbent, he will keep his seat. And this is reflective of really what we've been seeing the whole night, which is a very middle-of-the-road scenario. The New York Times Needle is now forecasting that Republicans will have 51 in the Senate and have a 75% chance of taking the House, which is honestly much lower than it was at the beginning of the night. A few bellwether races we've been looking at tonight is in Virginia. The 2nd District, the 7th District, and the 10th were of progressive difficulty for the Republicans to take, and the 10th was called for the Democrats, the 2nd was called for the Republicans, the 7th is a bit in the middle. So you're looking at Republicans taking 20, 30 seats in the House at least, and maybe taking the Senate, maybe not, at least if it continues to play out the same way it has so far. Back to you, Megan. Take it away.
All right, great. Thank you very much for that. I just want to comment on what David said, the very middle of the road. I mean, obviously with any election, there's going to be like anticipation and I suppose turmoil. But what we've seen so far, I guess, isn't very out of the ordinary and what like we expected how the election to go. Like especially, I know the swing states, we're still waiting for them to be called. But I feel like everything is kind of like how David said, very kind of to the book, in middle of the road.
No, absolutely, you're absolutely right. We haven't seen a lot of states. We're not seeing like a big resurgence in red or resurgence in blue. We're seeing a lot of just kind of middle of the road. Nothing, like you said, we haven't had swing states yet, but nothing too crazy. I mean, if you want to look at the 7th District of Virginia, which David mentioned, right now it's 51% for Vega and then 49% for Spanberger. So like even that district is super, super close, and that's with 88% of the votes counted. So districts like that one, just in Virginia and of course all across the country, it's only going to get closer and closer as the election goes on. I don't know if we're going to see like Republicans or Democrats necessarily pull away and see a huge swing in one direction. That just seems to be the nature of this election so far.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I mean, we know Florida was called. I know Florida isn't really necessarily even considered a swing state anymore. Florida was called for Republicans. But it's interesting to see maybe what will happen in Pennsylvania. That'll be a big one, I think, eventually when that happens. We're watching that one very closely right now.
Absolutely. Pennsylvania is one that I'm absolutely looking forward to seeing what's going to happen. I'm also looking forward to our own state of New Jersey, and especially in District 7. I mean, right now Tom Malinowski is up, but there is only 25% of the votes cast. He's at about 63%. Tom Keene Jr. is at 37%, but it's still estimated that Tom Keene is going to win because Malinowski kind of got, I don't know the right word to put it. He got put in a rough spot this year because, I mean, he barely won out over Keene last time he was elected, and they kind of reshifted the boundaries of District 7, so now it's looking like more right-leaning. So, I mean, that would be an important thing for New Jersey, for Tom Keene to win that section of New Jersey because, I mean, at least in the past couple years, I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think New Jersey has kind of leaned a little bit more Democrat, but getting Tom Keene in there could maybe shift things up in New Jersey.
Yeah, no, definitely. New Jersey is a blue state. It has been a blue state in the past, like, definitely recent years. But, you know, things can definitely change. Who's to say? But we were out in the field earlier, and you did most of the talking with the voters, but we did have the privilege to meet some of the voters in the nearby area. What did you encounter? Or, like, what did you see?
So, I mean, granted, we did only go to, we stayed in New Jersey, and we didn't get the full range of New Jersey. We don't have those kind of facilities, but from what we gathered, I feel like it did kind of lean more into Democrat. We did meet a couple Republicans, and they were talking about, what it means for them to vote and all that good stuff. But the people that we talked to, the majority of our interviews were with Democrats. So I feel like if New Jersey is going to have maybe a resurgence, or not a resurgence, but if we're going to see more Republicans in New Jersey, that hasn't happened yet. And I mean, so I mean, again, the people we talked to, more Democrat. I feel like New Jersey is going to end up being won by the Democrats. But again, we keep an eye on that District 7. Not a lot of votes have been counted, and like I said, only a quarter, so it should be a super interesting race for that one.
Yeah, no, definitely. It was very interesting, I think, to see the voters, like, even out in the field. And as Brian said, a lot of the voters we encountered did typically lean more blue. we did see some red voters, but more or less, New Jersey is definitely following that pattern of staying close to blue.
One thing I do want to talk about is looking at these Senate live results. Is we're seeing, I mean, kind of predictably, a lot of red, especially in the South. I mean, we had Rubio in Florida, but Herschel Walker, it looks like, is pulling away from Warner in Georgia, which, I mean, it's not super surprising, but especially in the stuff kind of leading up to the election, some of his debates were kind of circulated around the internet. I was able to see a couple of them, and I noticed that, like, he didn't participate in some of the debates, and I heard that this was being talked about on the live stream earlier, not necessarily about Herschel Walker, but about people not participating in debates. I believe it was John McCooch who said that in today's day and age where like one clip can kind of ruin your campaign, not going on debates and not appearing on debates, it doesn't give you that opportunity to kind of derail your own campaign, but it also doesn't give you the opportunity to really gain a lot of views. Because, I mean, at least I wouldn't think it would look good in the public if you have a chance to kind of talk about your policy and what you're going to do and you choose not to do that. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, I feel like it's just inappropriate to not participate in a debate, especially when you are running for something as important as public office. It just seems very unprofessional to me, and like you should participate and actively participate in a debate or any means of public office if that is something that you are willing to pursue. If that's something Herschel Walker participated in.
I mean, yeah. I mean, either way, like I said earlier, he, as of now, is winning in Georgia, so we're definitely going to keep an eye on that one going forward. And then, as of right now, the House live results, the Democrats looks like have lost 3 seats, while the Republicans have gained 2 seats. And, again, most of the stuff we're seeing counted is in notoriously red states like Texas and Alabama and Georgia and Florida. So, I mean, even at 9:40, it's still a bit too early to really call this. We're going to have to wait probably late into the night to see who's getting the clear advantage, and that is because, like we've mentioned a handful of times on this live stream, we're seeing more kind of a middle of the road, not a huge swing one way or the other.
Yeah, we'll have to see once the West Coast votes actually start getting counted, when those polls close. But right now, we are still very middle of the road. But we'll be updating here, see if there's any updates. Before we go, I know Florida was already called, and I know you weren't old enough to vote in the 2020 election, but I remember voting in the 2020 election. And Florida was considered like a swing state at that point. It was like kind of up for debate if it would actually rather flip red or blue. And something that I was kind of surprised about tonight is that Florida did flip to red, or that Florida is no longer considered a swing state because of just the large amount of Republican voters moving there. And I just think it's like very interesting how we still keep an eye out on states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Georgia, all those swing states, but now Florida is a state that's just so primarily red, and that like how the voting population could just drastically change in like 2 years or so.
And I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I want to ask your opinion.
No, yeah, I mean, in states like Florida, it is super interesting, and really just like you mentioned Pennsylvania, I feel like states like that have like a couple main cities, and then they have like maybe not a majority of the population, but like states like that have a lot of big cities. Like you said, Florida, you were surprised, like we were talking before we went on air, you were surprised that even Miami shifted to a vote more Republican. And we've seen in states like Georgia that are notoriously more red, but the city of Atlanta is like a more notoriously a section that would vote more blue. So, I mean, I don't know if we're going to see that necessarily in Pennsylvania with the big cities, obviously Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, voting blue compared to the rest of the state voting red. Again, it's still a little early to tell, but I mean, yeah, Florida is almost not even considered a swing state anymore because, at least in the past couple years, it is, again, almost guaranteed Republican victory.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, we'll see what happens for the rest of the night. Before we go, David, any updates that you have for us, or...?
Yeah, I can run through a couple of things in New York. Just some expected re-elections. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won the New York, I believe it's the 14th district. Nicole Maliotakis, a Republican of note, who won re-election in the 11th. Jerry Nadler won. In the Lee Zeldin, Kathy Hochul gubernatorial race, Lee Zeldin needs to get to about the 30% line of New York City in order to take the state. He's falling a bit short of it. He's at about 27, 28%, but there's still only about 20, 30% within New York City. So it's still way too early to tell who really has the edge there, although it does lean Hochul at this point.
All right, thank you. All right, so there's New York. Hopefully there's more sturdy updates when we come back, but we will be back in about 20 minutes with some more updates on the election. Once again, I'm Megan Kelly.
And I'm Brian Henderson.
All right, thank you very much for watching. Good night.
Hey, good job, guys.
once again. I'm Ryan Johnston, joined alongside Ryan Henry. Got a couple of flip states like you were talking about, flip seats that you were talking about, Ryan, in Maryland. Do you want to give us a quick rundown on those?
So, obviously, sticking first to Maryland, big news coming out. We talked about on FM, Wes Moore became the first black governor in the state in Maryland's history. He actually also flipped Larry Hogan was the former governor. He recently stepped down, retired. Wes Moore takes over, so now that flipped from Republican to now Democrat. Larry Hogan was one of the few prominent Republican members who was not supportive of former President Donald Trump, and now they bring in Wes Moore. But the big news and kind of the big storyline of so far in this early night election coverage has been the state of Florida. Ron DeSantis won very convincingly. Could be close on trajectory of having the biggest margin of victory in a governor race since Jeb Bush all the way back in 2002. And 4 seats have flipped from Democrat to Republican. District 13, 4, 7, and 15. Ron DeSantis in his victory speech said that voters in Florida are rewriting the political map. So, Ryan, I just wanted to get your thoughts on, really this historic, at least for the historic Republican victory for Florida. And do you think, a state that's generally been a swing state now might just be a red state?
I was talking about this with Amanda earlier, and we've seen a lot of Republicans start to move into Florida because Ron DeSantis, he's very popular. They really just love him down there. See him winning in Palm Beach right now. Leading, or I believe did he win Miami-Dade County already?
Won Miami-Dade County.
That's things that just don't typically happen in the state of Florida. Those are typically pretty Democratic areas in the state, and we see him come through and really take it. It kind of seems like Florida is becoming a new Republican stronghold.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously Ron DeSantis is one of the most polarizing, political figures in the United States. Obviously, one of the biggest, most prominent up-and-coming Republican figures. If it isn't former President Donald Trump for the 2024 election as the Republican nominee, it's probably going to be Ron DeSantis. So obviously, this is a guy who's really been surging up. We talked about his presence in Florida and how popular he's been, and I think I might have to agree with you. You've seen a lot of these older generation people moving down to Florida, kind of turning it into a red state, and it's becoming now very Republican. This is something we'll definitely have to keep track for as we head into the 2024 presidential election.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, Florida, it used to be, I remember back in our young days, back when we were younger, Ryan.
We're not that old.
We're not that old. We're getting there, though. Florida was more of really just a swing state, and I think DeSantis has really come through and changed that to a certain degree. But a state that, typically leans a bit more blue is us here in New Jersey, and I think we're seeing that reflected in our own District 11, where Seton Hall is located. Mickey Sherrill currently projected to win by the New York Times. She's got around 67% of the votes counted so far. Granted, not even half the votes are in yet, but do you think this is a reflection of the current mood just around Seton Hall University? And really, how do you see this affecting the local area?
I mean, obviously, when you're dealing with a college populace, especially, you're dealing more with a left-leaning liberal population, and, excluding the outside region, Essex County, Morris County, Passaic County, those aren't bustling areas, but, obviously a lot of it will be influenced by, the local populace, and, obviously, New Jersey has generally been blue. There has been some shift, especially when you look at last year when Jack Ciattarelli almost won the governor election against incumbent Phil Murphy, but I don't think there's a big drastic shift. It's kind of what I expected. Also, sticking to New Jersey news, Robert Menendez Jr. won the House seat, son of New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, so kind of keeping that political lineage along the way. And it looks like, David, do you have an update for us?
Yeah, Decision Desk HQ now projects that Josh Shapiro will be the next governor of the state of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, David. Obviously, Pennsylvania, another local interest of ours. Josh Shapiro looked like he was, very much winning a lot of these races in comparison to the Senate race between Fetterman and Oz, which could potentially go on for the next day, if not multiple. Shapiro was pretty much in the lead. He looked like he had a very strong lead there, especially in PA with, the big the big question of abortion rights with the recent reappeal of Roe v. Wade. Obviously, that was a big issue for a lot of Pennsylvania voters. Josh Shapiro taking lead and will now take over Tom Wolf's seat for the governorship.
Yeah, I think that it's a huge win for Democrats in Pennsylvania, like you were talking about, with the issue of abortion on the table. Pennsylvania, kind of a swing state. I think it leans a bit more Democratic, but I think that it's more of a reflection of where the state leans typically. So a big win for Democrats in Pennsylvania, and I'm sure many are hoping that abortion rights in that regard will be maintained in the state.
Yeah, and it will be interesting also to realize, will the effect, the just landslide victory Josh Shapiro had really over Doug Mastriano have an effect on this Senate race? Because obviously, you look at Pennsylvania, it was in terms of dollars spent on political ads, the race between Mehmet Oz and John Fetterman led to the most dollars being spent on political campaign ads. Obviously, Pennsylvania is such a huge swing state. You look at what the trajectory of recent presidential elections and how Pennsylvania's voted has usually led to the president winning. You look at 2016 when Trump won that state, he ended up winning the presidential election. And then in 2020, it flipped to Joe Biden, and then and then Biden ended up winning the presidency.
Yeah, and I was talking about this with Amanda earlier. Gubernatorial elections can be sort of a reflection of how the state will vote for a presidential election, and 2024 is really not that far away, Ryan. We're halfway through Biden's term right now. So I think this is a big win for Democrats, not only in the current state, but moving forward.
Yeah, and I would agree. Obviously, this is something we want to look out for the 2024 election. So, obviously just looking at some more big hot button issues and races, governor election looks like it might probably be going towards Greg Abbott, although, 56% of the votes still some way. But he's taken a very sizable lead over Beto O'Rourke. Obviously, Beto has been, kind of rising up in the ranks the last few years. You talk about when he, was very close to beating incumbent Senator Ted Cruz, and then he ran for president in 2020. Now his third time around trying to win a very Republican state, at least traditionally a very Republican state, trying to, get them to vote blue. Looks like he will be unsuccessful in that efforts. So what do you think this projects for the 2024 election, Ryan? And do you think, what does it say for Beto's the rest of his political career? Do you think he's just limited by the season? Do you think he can find his way into a Senate or even, governor office?
Well, I think it's definitely possible that he can take a Senate role, because as we can see, there's plenty of Democrats in Texas. It's well, Abbott has certainly taken a sizable lead, like you said. It's not like O'Rourke is getting absolutely blown out of the water here. I think that a Senate bid is perfectly possible for him. He just needs people to come and rally around him in his district. That being said, Texas has proven itself to be a more Republican-leaning state for years now. And Abbott is just... he might be one of the most polarizing figures in politics right now, Ryan. And it's not really a surprise that he's winning, but it's certainly a big win for Republicans in Texas to sort of maintain that stronghold that they have there.
Yeah, obviously maintain the stronghold. And speaking of another, polarizing figure, maybe not necessarily for his political ideology, but has really came along, Herschel Walker, the former standout running back, played both college and NFL. In the Georgia Senate race, it's as close as you can get. Right now, 73% of the vote, according to the New York Times, Herschel Walker is leading 49.4% to 48.7%. A lot of the votes that already had been counted were those northern districts, which do lean very much right. But, reports are coming out saying this is going to go deep into the night. This is a process that may not even be settled until, might not even be settled tonight, might even be settled tomorrow. And you look at this race, you look at Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania, these non-political figures, especially since Trump has, was elected in 2016, there's a lot more of these non-political figures gaining traction and even winning big political seats in, the Senate, the House, and, of course, the president with Trump back in 2016. I just want to get your thoughts on that. What could this potential victory for Walker, if he does end up winning, mean for the state of Georgia?
Oh, man, for the state of Georgia, that's a great question. But in terms of, the more non-political figures running, I think we can see that all across the country, even with people like Kanye West saying that they're going to run for office. Those we've seen just a huge uptick in like legitimate candidacies for people that aren't really associated with politics, that are more pop culture figures. And I wouldn't be surprised if it continues growing with a potential Mehmet Oz and a potential Herschel Walker victory. If Herschel Walker does win the state of Georgia, I mean, again, Georgia's a huge swing state because you've got that more Democratic city in Atlanta, and the rest of the state around it tends to lean a bit more to the right. So I could see a couple more inroads for the right in the state of Georgia.
Yeah, and I mean, I 100% agree. And going to your point, it just seems like ever since Trump won in 2016, you've seen kind of more of that anti-political figure coming out and winning these races you talked about. Obviously, he won in 2016, has a huge following, and then Herschel Walker, potentially him and Oz winning those Senate seats could flip it so where both the House, which is expected to go red, and the Senate can go red, which wouldn't really bode well for President Biden and some of the policies he's trying to push or get through. You talk about how much he's done the last 6 years, while he still has control of both the House and Senate. But now it'll be interesting to see how he approaches new policy making. Will he be able to get as much policy making done? There's stuff that he's already done, but I assume there's more in the docket he wants to do. He does want to get done.
I'm sure, yeah, I'm sure he does. And taking a look at these Senate results right now, it's 41 senators for the Republican Party, 47 senators for the Democratic Party, according to the AP. For the House, GOP has gained 2 seats. The Democrats have lost 3. GOP currently has 86 seats nationwide. Democrats have 48. So, Ryan, not really this red wave that a lot of people were expecting. A much more 50-50 election, but Republicans still making a couple of inroads nationwide.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, there has been a mix. We talk about the governor races in both Maryland and Massachusetts, which went from Republican to Democrat. You mentioned that there's some traction going on, but not the complete full red wave maybe some had expected. But it is likely that the trend that a sitting Democrat president will not have control of both the House and Senate following the midterm elections. That is a trend that's been going on since President Jimmy Carter was in office. So, while there is some of that red wave, maybe it's not as big as some, Republicans had initially hoped or expected.
Yeah, and on that, how do you think that'll affect President Biden, not having control? Because a lot of his agenda, he's looking to get essentially forced through the House and the Senate by a Democratic majority. How do you think that'll affect his agenda moving forward?
I mean, obviously it'll affect his agenda a lot moving forward. You look at some of the stuff that he was able to, push forward. The big thing being that the student debt relief bill, which was one of the biggest passings that he had in office. And there's still stuff that people aren't really sure. Obviously there's the big question of abortion rights, which was obviously with the Roe v. Wade decision to reappeal that. Obviously, that was something he wanted to hopefully try codifying into law, but with the new Republican-controlled House, maybe it isn't as likely as much. So, you won't see as much hot button pressing issues that Democrats would have hoped to codify into laws. Probably won't happen, especially with a House and potentially even a Senate in Republican control.
Yeah, and on that student loan debt, if I'm not mistaken, I think some Republican states were suing over that bill, and a Republican-controlled House or even Senator or both would make it so much harder for him to achieve that. And that's a major campaign promise right there for Biden. That's a lot of what these Democrats are trying to do to secure young voters is to try and get this student loan debt.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously the student loan debt is just, especially because of all the financial uncertainty with the COVID pandemic, getting that student debt relief was a huge victory, not only for, just Democrats across the board, but a lot of these younger millennials and Gen Z people like yourself and I, people who are a bit older. So, the issues he got, that was a big victory for the Democratic Party. Now we'll just be seeing how they can readjust and what will happen as we get into these coming months and we lead up to the 2024 election.
Well, we'll see if there any more news comes after this break. We'll take another break for here in studio coverage. Be sure to tune in to our on-air FM coverage very shortly. But for myself, Ryan Johnston, and Ryan Henry, we'll be seeing you shortly.
I'm Amanda Des, who's joined by Megan Kelly, and we're covering the midterm elections for 89.5 WSOU. Here's David covering our politics, our news updates for the election.
Hi, Amanda. Thank you. An update since we were last on air. There have been 2 calls in the Senate race, and that would be Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire has been projected as the winner of the race, along with Chuck Grassley of Iowa. And where that leaves us with safe and projected seats at the moment is there are currently 94 of the 100 Senate seats have been called, with 6 of them that are left over. And these 6, all 6 of them can really go either way. And we're going to find out over the rest of the night and really over the rest of the week which way they're going to go. Those 6 states are Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Washington, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And depending on how they play out, we're going to find out who has control of the Senate. Because while it was expected that Republicans would gain control after tonight, it really looks more like it can go either way. One other thing of note in New York, Lee Zeldin really needs to hit that 30% line in New York City. He's exactly at that 30% line with 80% reporting. So we'll have more on that as it comes in. Over to you, Amanda and Megan.
Thank you very much, David. Always a jam-packed review from you. Thank you. A lot to talk about. A lot to cover.
Definitely.
I mean, I know the last time I was here, Pennsylvania was called in the meantime.
Yes,
which
it
is a
was.
very big call because that's a swing state.
Yeah, Josh Shapiro was called
Yeah.
as governor, and this is a good indicator for the turnout or like the outcome of the Senate election.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it's Mehmet Oz versus Fetterman, and
Josh Shapiro. Excuse me. Yes. No, you're right.
yeah. versus Fetterman. And Oz was underperforming in the areas Trump dominated back in 2020. And Fetterman is slightly leading, overperforming the areas of Biden's margin back in 2020. So I think it's like interesting how there was a lot of buzz for Oz, especially since he's a non-political figure. People know him from his Dr. Oz show we all saw growing up. So it's interesting to see this new wave, even like thinking about Herschel Walker, who doesn't really have a political background. He's a former football player, retired football player. So
now apparently Kanye wants to run. So
yeah, like you see a lot of non-political figures coming into the political space.
Yeah.
So, and if Mehmet Oz does lose the race, it could mean like maybe that wave of non-political figures is dying down. But you can also argue the other way if someone like Herschel Walker wins the Senate seat in Georgia.
Yeah, no, definitely. That is a very good point. It is interesting to see all these, like, non-political figures kind of step up and take office. And I suppose it's a good thing because it really does highlight, the core American beliefs that really, you can be anything you want to be if you just work hard at it. But then it just kind of, like, I think there is a fine line between, like, being anything you want to be and doing it well. But then sometimes there's, like, things get maybe a bit messy. Like, all of a sudden, Dr. Oz is running in the midterm election, and that's a bit interesting to see as a voter. But we'll see what happens. I mean, a big win for the Democrats with Shapiro, who was recently called for Pennsylvania. And we'll see once the other winners come in. And then New Hampshire was just called, too.
Yes, New Hampshire. I'm not too surprised about New Hampshire.
No, not really.
I believe there's a wider margin between red and blue votes there with Maggie Hassan winning. But I really want to focus on Georgia.
That's like the next swing state.
Yes, definitely. Ralph Warnock is the incumbent for the state of Georgia, who won back in 2020 when there was more of a blue wave. People were out voting for Biden because there's a lot of like never again Trumper voters on both sides, both Democrats and Republicans, which really aided his victory in Georgia. But I feel like there's a lot of energy on the Republican Party, especially since there's a Democrat in office. So I feel like every year a midterm comes around, there's a resistance against those, whoever the opposite party is, if that makes sense. So now, meaning that there's a Democrat in office during the midterms, it's a way for Republicans to kind of like win back some power in preparation for the 2024 election.
Yeah, definitely. That is a really good point, and it's not really surprising either. Like I feel like whichever party is like the president, there definitely is an attempt during like the midterm elections to kind of take back some power, like you said.
That's why I feel like it was happening within the Republican Party, especially if they do win the House and or the Senate.
Yeah,
you will see that energy that Trump really like brought into the Republican Party.
Definitely. I don't know about you, but I've heard a lot of people talking before this midterm election how like it was going to be like a big night for Republicans. And I know like some states have already been called, and David has been saying how it's been a very like middle of the road 50-50 election. And I just think it's kind of interesting considering everybody was like kind of like so sure that like the Republicans were going to like win with like flying colors. But we've had a pretty normal night, I would say, in terms of midterm coverage.
Yeah, I think it's still too early to call a lot of races, but I was somewhat surprised, honestly, given like the previous predictions of Oz winning Pennsylvania. And again, like that race has not been called, so I will not be like calling that.
Can't be for certain. Yeah.
But it's interesting, maybe like even though like you see the energy in the Republican Party, like those Democratic areas, and even with Oz underperforming the areas Trump did really well in the past, like maybe that's not always true. Like we have to kind of look at things objectively and not at what we see, the energy, we see people saying this and that, but we really need to look at like the data and what the polls are saying.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of what the polls are saying, David, do you have any new information for us?
Yeah, I'd like to take you over to Arizona. We were talking earlier about Maricopa County and some logistical difficulties with the tabulation machines. There were 20% of them were down at different polling sites. The numbers have finally come in. Polls have closed. Results are out in Arizona. With 47% of the votes in, Carrie Lake is behind Katie Hobbs. Katie Hobbs is ahead by a convincing 14 percentage point lead. It's unclear how much of the vote that is out so far is early votes and mail-in balloting, or how much is election day. And Hobbs ahead of Lake. Even more so is, what's his name?
For who?
Is Blake Masters running behind in the Arizona Senate race. Masters is running behind by 15, 16 points. Arizona, Republicans had hopes for Arizona. It's not looking like it's going to go so well for them. The election really the control of the Senate really could come down to Nevada. Nevada is not going to report results until every last voter has voted, and that's not last election. That was not until 12:53 in the morning. Tonight, it's quite likely that will be the same thing.
Great, thank you very much. I don't want to take up too much time, but Arizona potentially going blue, that's a big thing.
It is a very interesting thing, but I think it also reflects back in 2020, you saw Biden won Arizona. Because a lot of voter mobilization was utilized, especially on the left side. So I'm not too surprised if a Democrat wins there. But speaking of Nevada, I wonder, I kind of like read and like looking at predictions, polls, things like that. It's probably going to go more towards the right. So I think it's interesting how like you see Nevada versus like in Arizona, where like these states that I believe were considered purple at one point are solidifying into one stance or one leaning. So I think it also reflects the polarization of the country.
Yeah, I mean, definitely America is not a stranger to polarization, but only time will tell and which way these states will actually end up going.
Yeah.
We
And
will go
And I wonder, like, what this means. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
For the 2024 election.
Mm-hmm.
Because if Arizona votes blue this year, like they did in 2020, then will that pattern continue in 2024? And on the other hand, with Nevada, will that be the same answer? Will that be the same pattern? So, like you said, only time will tell.
Only time will tell. And with that, I think we're going to end it there. We will, of course, be continuing to keep you updated with information about the midterm election. We will be back in about 20 minutes, but in the meantime, I'm Megan Kelly.
And I'm Amanda de Jesus.
Thank you very much for watching. Have a good night.
Welcome back to WSU News studio coverage of Election Day 2022. Once again, I'm Ryan Johnson. I'm now joined alongside Andrew Rakulia. David, you said you have news for us.
I do have news for you. NBC News is now projecting that Kathy Hochul will continue in the role of governor of New York State. She's defeated Lee Zeldin.
Wow. Big news for the Democratic Party right there.
Yeah, this race was expected to be more closer than expected in the final weeks. David, would you mind explaining what the margin is right now?
Yeah, right now in New York State, Kathy Hochul leads Lee Zeldin by about 20 points. She's up. She has 1,900,000 votes to Zeldin's 1.25 million. Zeldin came in at that 30% line that we've been talking about all night. He met that bar there, but he didn't just need to meet that bar. He needed to go a leg over that. And he was not, listen, it's difficult for a Republican to win in New York State, and Zeldin just did not have the muster to get over the finish line.
Yeah, it's a very hard environment for Republicans in New York, and expected in a typical red wave year, as most Republicans were hoping. They were hoping for better, and it shows how they don't have the momentum they were seeking.
Yeah, well, one state where they still have a chance, at least, is Pennsylvania. It's still a very tight race in Pennsylvania between John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz. Fetterman with a slight lead right now. According to the AP, it's around 40,000 votes in favor of Fetterman, which is around a percentage point. Andrew, where do you see this race going, and how do you think that'll affect things moving forward in Pennsylvania?
So Amanda mentioned this a little bit earlier. Yes, it's getting close. As of right now, Fetterman only leads by 1.3%. But however, the New York Times thinks that Fetterman is more likely to win because he is outperforming Biden's 2020 presidential margin. If you look in all the rural counties, Perry County, Forest County, Sullivan County, Butler County, he's leading by 7, 8, 9 points more than Biden. And even in the counties where Oz is winning, he is underperforming Trump's margins. Oz is winning, and they're all counted already. Oz is leading by 19 in Westmoreland County when Trump won it by 28. He's leading in 25 in Butler County when Trump won it by 33. Oz is underperforming. He's not as popular as Trump. He has a popularity problem. He has a likability problem. Fetterman has promised to campaign in every county for every vote, and that's seeming to pay off. So I think I would be much more likely to be on Fetterman's side, I'm much likely to consider Fetterman coming out victorious at the end of this week.
And assuming Fetterman does come out victorious, what do you think this means for Pennsylvanians as a whole, and really for the state moving forward in terms of a political standpoint?
Well, it's still close. Josh Shapiro won easily. That was called like an hour ago. And Fetterman and Oz, that race is still close. There were a lot of concern about Fetterman's health. I feel like voters are going to keep that in the back of their mind. If Fetterman does go to the Senate, they are going to keep his health in mind, like whether he is physically able to serve and whether or not he can last a full 6 years in the Senate chamber. So we'll see how that goes. Pennsylvania is still a state in play. It's been close for the last 3 election cycles, but we'll see how it goes.
And just a quick update for people at home, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, did win her district, so she'll be remaining in office for a couple more years. But taking a look at another hotly contested state in Arizona, we've still got a lot of stuff brewing over there. Very, very tight matchup between these two candidates.
Yeah. So far, we have Mark Kelly leading with 58% compared to Mark Kelly at 39.7%. Masters is running fairly competitive, is still likely to go Kelly's way, I'd say. But this race can be down to the wire, especially in Maricopa County, which has leaned more Democratic in recent years. But we'll just have to wait to see as more votes come in because it is only 8:15 on the West Coast right now. We still have a lot more time for more votes to come in, even though 50% has already been reported in Arizona right now.
And again, taking a look at Arizona as a whole, what do you think a Kelly victory would mean? Do you think it would turn the state a bit more blue moving forward into the 2024 presidential election, perhaps?
Well, Kelly has a much more favorable opinion among the state than Kristen Sinema. Kristen Sinema was elected in a blue wave year in 2018, but however, in the years since, especially in the past 2 years of Biden's first half term, she's repeatedly been a focal point of the Democrats' agenda not passing Congress, like the $15 minimum wage or the Build Back Better Act. So Kelly is very popular. I'm sure he's going to be in the Senate for a very long time. He hasn't had any controversy. He's really more stay low profile by doing all the right things. However, Kristen Sinema, I feel like, is going to be a bit more challenging to see if she's even going to survive a primary challenge in 2024.
Oh, wow. And taking a look at it, and one more highly contested state, you mentioned you want to talk about Nevada. Adam Laxalt challenging the incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto. How do you see things shaking out in Nevada?
So we don't have results yet. We don't have anything yet from Nevada. It's only 8:16 right now on the West Coast and in Nevada. But I think this is really going to be one of the three most competitive Senate seats this cycle. It's going to come down to Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Nevada to decide Senate control. I do think Adam Laxalt has had the edge in the past month or so. He's been consistently marginally leading in the polls, but Cortez Masto could have some momentum because polls in Nevada have tended to underestimate Democratic votes leading up to the election. So, who knows?
And taking a look at the country as a whole, how do you see this affecting the presidential campaign in 2024, with the results that we've seen so far and the results that are not only to be expected, but that you're expecting to see coming up in the next few hours, few days, even few weeks?
So if it's a red wave, I don't see Biden trying to run again for re-election in 2024. However, if it's very marginal gains in the House, like a red ripple, you'd say, like the lowest kind of red momentum you can have. They only win one House of Congress as opposed to both. Biden still would have more sway that way. And Trump's popularity and the Republican Party's popularity wouldn't be so strong. So if that's the result of this election, Biden would be more encouraged to run, showcasing that even though his low popularity hasn't exactly harmed him to the extent that Democrats had feared for the last year, we could still see him try to run against Trump potentially 2 years from now.
And taking a look at the results so far, and again, the ones that you're expecting, how do you see this affecting President Biden's agenda moving forward? Maybe a split Congress or something like that. How do you think that would affect President Biden moving forward?
So if they hold on to the Senate, that could be really, really good. Even if it's just 50-50, he'd still have the challenge of Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, but he's done that before. They'd just be right back where they started. It would be no different. But the House would be a different animal because if Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader from California, he would be expected to become the Majority Leader. He would control the federal congressional agenda, especially in budget. The House has the power of budgeting in Congress, according to the Constitution. So all budgeting bills have to go through McCarthy's desk. He has to approve all those bills. That's at least one way Biden has to work with McCarthy going forward, should the Republicans win.
And just a quick update for our viewers at home. Right now, we're sitting at around 140 seats for the GOP and around 86 seats in the House for the Democratic Party. The GOP has gained 2 seats, and the Democratic Party has lost 4. So again, a bit of that red ripple that you were talking about. Not a huge gain for the Republican Party so far that we've seen, but some slight inroads being made.
Yeah, I see the Republicans gaining about 235-ish seats compared to the Democrats sitting at 200. The Republicans only needed to win 5 seats. They're going to win a bit more than that thanks to redistricting and overall unpopularity of the Democrats and people more inclined to vote Republican in the past 2 years. But I don't think it's going to be as bad as Democrats had feared.
And those stats were also according to the Associated Press. Also according to the Associated Press, GOP sitting around 44 Senate seats right now, Democratic Party sitting around 41. Anything that you're seeing in this map, Andrew?
So in Georgia, Warnock only trails Walker with 88% counted at 0.6%. This is going to fluctuate. It has been fluctuating. I expect it to fluctuate more. It's going to be a long one. Hang tight for that one. I don't think we're going to know that for a week, honestly. And otherwise, I expect North Carolina to go the Republicans' way. I think Ted Budd is going to win.
It was called.
It was called?
Yeah, NBC News has called North Carolina for Ted Budd over Sherry Beasley.
So yeah, that was expected. I expected Republicans to take North Carolina, and I also expect them to have the advantage in Wisconsin and also in Utah. Senator Mike Lee in Utah was fearful that Evan McMullin, the independent candidate running as opposed to a Democrat on the major party ticket, was going to potentially unseat him, and by appealing to the state's more moderate Republican base. But I think Senator Lee is going to hold on.
Any other updates before we send it to a break, Dalvin?
Just a few more race calls we've had. NBC News has projected Ron Wyden to re-election as the senator from Oregon. Alex Padilla is the senator from California. And the Republican candidate will continue his seat in Idaho. It's playing out about as we've spoken over the night. The wild cards that are left are Georgia, where if one candidate does not win over 50% of the vote, it will go to a runoff, I believe, in December. And Walker, although he is leading Warnock at the moment, he is not over that 50% line. So forget not knowing by tomorrow or by next week. We may not know who has control of the Senate until January. I think that's all for now.
Yeah, right back where we started. I was expecting that for a while. I expected that going in, but it's Georgia. It's going to be close again, just like 2021, and that's the way it's going to be moving forward, at least in the near future.
Well, we'll see if we can get any more updates for all you viewers at home after the break. Once again, I've been Ryan Johnston, joined alongside Andrew Rakulia, and for our desk analyst, David Holtzman. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be right back.
Hello and welcome back to WSOU's coverage here on our YouTube channel. This is the final time that we will be going online here on YouTube on the live stream. Thank you so much to everyone who stuck around and followed us at any point during this stream. It has been a great time to cover this election with you and everybody else that's going on. Thank you to everybody who's been involved with this. Thank you to our producer, Joe Walls. Thank you to Joe Matthews working on graphics, David Holtzman working here as our reporter. We'll go to him in just a bit. Ryan Henry right next to me, and all of our newscasters that have come on tonight. But we've got an election to recap, Ryan. There's been a lot going on. A lot of movement within the United States. We had some flips. A lot of things stayed the same, and we're also still waiting on plenty. To start out the night, we had the state of Florida. We had Ron DeSantis absolutely dominating in that state, winning by over 1.5 million votes in the state of Florida to become the governor of Florida, to continue to become the governor of Florida. You had a lot going on there. Greg Abbott, we had to wait a little bit on him in the state of Texas. But let's start with Florida. You had Ron DeSantis end up winning that race. Again, no surprise there, but the fact of how much he won by, that was quite the surprise. Florida is showing a lot of red down there. They flipped a few House seats over there as well. There was a lot going on in Florida.
Yeah, I mean, Florida, like you said, really, this is probably the most notable state where the red wave has really come into effect. You talk about Ron DeSantis and just the landslide he won the race. He was talking how, voters in Florida have really rewritten the political map. And I mean, he is right to a certain extent. You think Florida generally as a swing state, but these last few elections, especially since Ron DeSantis really came into power as governor there, it's mainly been red. And you talk about not only did he win, but he was winning in counties that have mostly been blue counties. He won in Miami-Dade. He was won in Palm Beach. And you looked, four total House seats flipped from Democrat to Republican in that state. So, a very big red shift in that state, something that could be very indicative and a good, asset for the Republican Party in the 2024 presidential election.
They look at Ohio, their Senate, that went Republican with 90% of that vote in, and they also had a very Republican voting on their ballot as well. So you see a lot of states winning a lot in terms of the Republican Party. You see that shift over there here in the United States. Texas also went to Greg Abbott, 75% of that vote in, 55.8% of that vote going to Greg Abbott with 3.6 million over there for the Republican from Texas. And then Beto O'Rourke, 43% of that vote, just under 2.8 million votes over there in Texas. So a state that coming into tonight there was potential for Beto O'Rourke to end up winning that state, and it turns out that Abbott won in that landslide. But I think the expectation, if you had to go and really decide, who do you think is going to win, Greg Abbott had to be a majority pick right there. But the margin, again, it's like the state of Florida, the margin that Abbott won by, a little bit surprising to a lot over there in Texas. Abbott has had his issues over there, so there's a lot going on over there in Texas. Definitely something to watch out for. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, like you said, Greg Abbott was probably going to be the leader or the favorite in that to win the race, but the majority he won, I mean, there's still some votes still counting in, but I mean, they essentially called it off when it was around 55-45. Right now it's around 55-43, but you look at Beto, he had such a strong presence back in 2018 when he was going up against Ted Cruz. Then he was running in 2020. He didn't get the Democratic nomination for the presidency, but he was still a prominent figure. And then he now going for the governor's seat really didn't put up as strong of a showing. I don't know if that's just a factor due to voter turnout, or the people of Texas believe Greg Abbott was doing a good enough job that he could remain governor there.
And then you have a lot of local stuff going on. But before we get into all of that, we are going to go to the final time for our live reporter over here, David Holtzman. There's a lot going on. A lot has been called. A lot has been moving, especially. What do you have for us so far?
Good evening, John. Control of the United States Senate is down to 5 states at the moment that remain wild cards. And those states are Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Wisconsin. These 5 states have not been called. We may not know them tonight. We may not know them this week. In the case of Georgia, which will go to a runoff if neither candidate reaches the 50% threshold, we may not know them this month. All in all, if we're looking back on tonight was not the red wave many analysts, pollsters expected. The polls this way were wrong. You can say they were wrong. They were too red. The polls this time around overestimated the Republican candidates, perhaps trying to make up for 2020, perhaps trying to make up for 2016. And in this case, we saw, for example, Patty Murray was called the senator for Washington. That race was called right off the bat.
The RCP average only had her ahead by 3 or 4 points, but the election was called for her right away. So all in all, this was more of a Republican ripple. The control of the Senate is still very much in the air, and we may not know for another 2 months. Control of the House is still projected 3-to-1 odds to go to the Republicans by the New York Times, but those 3-to-1 odds are not the same convincing 3-to-1 odds that they were at the beginning of the night. All in all, some questions have to be asked by both parties. Republicans have to ask themselves whether candidates matter, whether or not candidates like Blake Masters or Dr. Oz, who have likability problems, are capable of winning. Republicans should ask what Ron DeSantis in Florida did right, that he was able to win by, right now he's ahead by about 20 points with 97% reporting. And Democrats have questions that they have to ask. Why is the Senate in danger? What policies, what laws could they have passed with control of both the House and the Senate that would lead them to keep both the House and the Senate as we approach the next election in 24? Thank you very much. It's been a good night. And now back over to you, John and Ryan.
Thank you so much, David, for all of your updates throughout the night. It's been a pleasure to have you with us. It's been a great help. So now we got to finish off the show here, Ryan. What are your thoughts on that, though? A lot of great stuff there, because you have the expectation coming into tonight, a lot of Republican expectations, very high expectations. The red wave was expected to come. We take a look at what we did last year, right? You had a situation where you had Jack Ciattarelli in the state of New Jersey. He won. He didn't win, but he almost won by a very close margin compared to what analysts would have thought. It was expected to be more of a Murphy landslide than it was. Murphy still won by quite a bit, but there was a lot of hope for the Republican Party that there would be a bit closer of a race. So in Democratic states, and you're seeing them dominate in the Republican states. You're seeing them dominate in Florida. You're seeing them dominate in Texas. But in battleground states where they were expected to win handily, and a red wave was supposed to come tonight, it doesn't seem like it has. Now, they have flipped a number of House seats. They've done a great job at doing that. But like David mentioned, there's not that red wave that we were expecting to see coming into tonight. So definitely something interesting for the Democrats to see, because you have a Republican Party that you have half of it trying to get away from Donald Trump ideals. You have the other half trying to get back to the quote-unquote good old days of the Republican Party, and they're kind of clashing a bit, and it allows the Democratic Party to at least hold on to what they already have. You're expecting the House to flip. You're expecting the Senate to maybe flip, but like David said, that's up in the air right now. So what are your thoughts on that? Yeah, and I mean, like you said, the red wave was really expected to come, especially, I think a lot of people are expecting both the House and Senate to flip here. You talk about, the 2021, how close Jack Ciattarelli, was with Phil Murphy in New Jersey, a very prominently blue state. And then you also look at Virginia, where Glenn Youngkin won that governor race. That was a huge deal as well, with his whole, the whole notion of critical race theory and how he won the Virginia governor seat there. And you look at some of these battleground states. Pennsylvania's still up in the air, but it looks like now it's shifting towards John Fetterman. You look at, Nevada, Arizona, those are still up there. Washington, that should have been a bit closer, but now it's going to lean towards Patty Murray. So, the Republican Party will have some questions to do. I mean, like you said, looking what Ron DeSantis has done well in the state of Florida, and, that we mentioned this a bit on the radio or on the FM stream, but right. The Ron DeSantis Donald Trump situation, how's that going to unfold in the 2024 presidential election? Because if Donald Trump isn't nominated for the Republican nominee, it's probably going to go to Ron DeSantis. And Ron DeSantis, who was formerly advocated by Donald Trump, doesn't seem to be on his good side now, at least when it comes to running for the presidential election. So there's a lot going on with the Republican Party, and the rest of this midterm election will tell the story of where they go from here. And the Democrats, they look to kind of improve on what they've done before and get back to where they were. But for now, that will do it from us here on our live stream here. Just some advice: if you're waiting on Nevada, go to bed, because that is not going to be reported for a while. They do like to take their time. We won't know for that for a week. And a lot of this stuff we won't know for a while. But we will have the rest of your coverage here on our 89.5 FM stream. Ryan, is there anything else you'd like to add? I think I'm good. All right. We think it's been a great show. Yes, it's been a great show. Again, thank you so much for watching with us, for watching this live stream here on YouTube right here. We'll have some more FM coverage later on in the night, but it's almost winding down here. It's wound down here on the live stream again. Thank you to everybody involved with this. It has been a pleasure to work with everybody, to our producer, Joe Walls, to David Holtzman to my left, to Ryan Henry to my right, and all of our analysts throughout the night. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.